Welcome, persisters and brothers. It's Lizbeth, and I haven't checked in with you at what feels like ages, but really, I've just been out of town for a week. I went to Las Vegas for a book conference, 20 books to 50K, and wow, was that something to be able to organize a conference with 2,000 attendees post-COVID. I was gobsmacked at how incredibly well run the conference was and what amazing speakers and nice attendees. Super grateful to my dear friend Gary for being good company and allowing me to be his roommate for a little while and stay and visit with him. Just what made it so much more fun. And it was a lot for somebody who truly loves people, but is an introvert. It was overwhelming. And yet I think I'm going to go again and it gets less overwhelming is what I hear. So shout out to Craig Martell and the other folks who run 20 books to 50K conferences for writers. It's fantastic. I'm really, really excited for today's episode. I'm going to introduce to you in a minute, Betsy Graziani Fasbinder. She is an author that I knew from my publication experience. Betsy's written several books, but the one we'll talk maybe most about today is In Her Shoes. Betsy is not only a fabulous and award-winning author of books on public speaking, on a novel, on being a stepmother when the child's biological mother had passed away, but she's also a coach. She's been a therapist. She teaches Fortune 500 companies workshops on communication, and she teaches people about public speaking. That's one of her superpowers. So Betsy is an all-around amazing person, and I look forward to introducing you to her. And also she has a stunning podcast that I was fortunate to be on called The Morning Glory Project. So in show notes, we'll have these links. And I surely hope that you enjoy Betsy as much as I know I'm just about to. And also props to Betsy. I just got back home from Las Vegas and had realized I didn't sync my calendar. And she was kind enough to be recorded early so that I could not miss out on the other appointment I have today. Excuse me, I have a book group that I'm doing for a group of Chattanoogans. And I haven't done a live book group since I've moved here. So, an in-person book group. So thanks, Betsy, for letting it happen. And thanks to Trish and her friends at the book group for inviting me. And we'll get started in just a little second here. Betsy Graziani Fasbinder is with us now. And thank you, Betsy. I gave you an introduction and I made a big mistake. So let me just correct that before you start, and welcome. Welcome to Persistence You. Betsy's book, one of them is Filling Her Shoes. I got that mixed up with In Her Shoes, so that's a big difference. And, we'll talk about that a little bit today and Betsy's other books. But Betsy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I love talking with you.
Oh, it's wonderful to talk with you as well. And I adored being your guest on the Morning Glory Project. So thank you for that. And I'll need to remember to put a link to that in show notes as well. And you're coming to us from California, correct?
I am. I live in the Bay Area, just about 30 minutes north of San Francisco.
Beautiful. And you have done so many great works. But one of the things that I adored was when you have promoted your book, Filling Her Shoes, and you talk about the beauty of inheriting a family when you marry. But your situation was maybe a little different than others. And I love some of the lessons that you unpacked about that. So could we talk a little bit about that particular book and how you came to write Filling Her Shoes?
Sure. It's really sort of a love story of my family, not just of me and my partner, but of my family. I had known my husband. I met him when I was 15 and he was 25, but we didn't get together because I was 15 and he was 25, right? And he wasn't a bad guy.
Sounds appropriate.
It would not have been appropriate. And he married and I married, and he was roommates with my now brother-in-law and friends with my sister in college. So they were college chums and I was the little kid sister. And so
Right.
it's kind of an extended part of our family community. And I knew his first wife and I knew when his son Max was born. And then his wife, very young, in her very early 30s, got leukemia and passed when Max was had just turned 5. And of
Oh,
course, I always loved Tom because he was part of our family, but I didn't think of him romantically because he was with somebody. You
sure.
put somebody in the friend zone, I think they call that.
Right.
I just truly didn't think of him in those ways for myself. And then, about a year and a half after she had passed, he called me up. He was like, what? Oh, wait, I have to recalibrate who you are. And, we had known each other for 16 years before our first date.
Right.
So it didn't take long for us to know what we had. And so when we got together, then of course, the reason my book is called Filling Her Shoes is I was stepping into the shoes of a mother taken too soon. And
Right.
there are lots and lots of blended families in the world for various reasons, divorce and separation and remarriage and all the
Sure.
kinds of things that cause blendings of families. But when I'm a reader. So of course, when I was becoming a blended family of this kind, I went to the bookstore and I was looking on the shelf for a book that would kind of provide me some guidance. And everything was about managing the ex and visitation and child support and all those kinds of things that had nothing to do with my life.
Right.
And I realized that I had, on one hand, the really good fortune that lots of families with divorce don't have, that I had something they don't have, which is I didn't have to worry about an ex. I didn't have to worry about custody battles or alimony checks or,
Right.
all the kind of complicating things that can happen in a divorce situation. But I did have tremendous grief. Our life, I call it, the subtitle of my book is a memoir of an inherited family, because our life was built on a foundation of loss. Had there not been, and I was thrilled to become a mother
Hmm.
and felt a little guilty about being thrilled because the only reason I was a mother is that my husband and my son had lost somebody. And
Wow.
there was this push me, pull me feeling about how I should feel. And I didn't feel as though I could burden them with that. They had
Sure.
already suffered a loss.
Right.
And me reconciling my, wanting to feel like a mommy versus their tremendous loss didn't feel fair. So
Right.
I did what I have always done when I have trouble coping, and that is that I wrote. And I wrote stories about our life. I wrote not just journal, but I wrote them as stories to cope because I couldn't really talk about it. So I never intended to show them to anybody. They weren't for public consumption. And then when my older son, and then we subsequently had another son together.
Mhm.
And so when my older son, the one whom I adopted when we got married, when he was about, I don't know, 16 or 17, I was invited to read at a Mother's Day event. And they asked me to read a story about a mother. And I thought, I'll look through those. And pretty soon, I just thought I was reading this sweet little story about loving my son. And the reaction from the audience told me that I had something more, that I was
Wow.
striking a chord in people that either had lost a parent, had lost a spouse, knew a friend. There were, just like, as soon as you tell your story, even if the circumstances are wildly different from somebody else's, if you tell essential truth,
Right.
they connect with it and heartstrings are pulled. And so I asked my son if he was okay. First of all, I asked him if he was okay if I read the story, and he was 16. I don't care, mom, go, like a lot of 16-year-old boys. But he was so supportive, and he said, no, and I asked him if he wanted to pre-read it. No, I trust you. Whatever you say, I know that you'll tell the truth.
Oh,
Very lovely that way. And so it became this collection, Filling Her Shoes.
I think that is so beautiful. You had the good fortune of inheriting a family. And I know that there were certain things you didn't have to deal with, but one thing you might have had to deal with, in some families, there is a romanticism if someone has died There is that sort of like they've become an angel in their mind, and then you are here. Did you have any of that, or was it pretty seamless? Because you had a long history of friendship before the
Mhm.
relationship began.
Well, I don't think that her name was Janet. I don't think that Janet got elevated on this pedestal the way that sometimes sort of somebody becomes not just a ghost, but a god.
Right, right.
I didn't have that. My husband's a very practical, kind of down to earth person. So I didn't have so much that, but I also, though, in addition to loving my son and my husband and us becoming a family and dealing with grief, there was also his mother's extended family.
Okay.
So I call them not my in-laws, but my outlaws, because my mother-in-law wasn't technically my mother-in-law. She
Right.
was my husband's first wife's mother, right?
Oh, wow.
But they were very close to my son.
Right.
So they became mine. So I call them my
Wow.
outlaws. And they're now, many years later, 32 years later, they're now passed. But they were an important part. And they, of course, they couldn't have been lovelier to me, but they lost a daughter and I
Right.
was stepping in.
That's right.
Know that they were on one hand, just like I was saying before, love and loss, grief and gratitude are not opposites in our family. They are woven. So they were, I'm sure, on one hand, and they told me so, they were happy to have me loving their grandson, and they were very supportive. And I'm sure that it was uncomfortable for them to see me stepping into a role with their grandson that was
Right.
occupied by their daughter. And, so it was mostly, I had a lovely experience, but there were moments that were
Sure.
challenging in that way. And then, we also just had the reality of the fact that I was stepping into a crowd of people that had suffered a profound loss. So when I was thinking about, oh, my first Mother's Day, I'm all bubbly about that. Well, that's the day that they remember who they lost.
Right.
So there was this opposite path in our minds. And it was a setup for me to be disappointed because it wasn't about, making cards and bringing breakfast in bed like you kind of see on the Hallmark movies, right?
Right.
It was much more of a wet blanket on things. It was, difficult. And I didn't know what to do with it. That's why I wrote
Right.
that.
I love that because, just like you said, love and loss and grief and gratitude coexist, but you were cognizant of it. I don't know that everyone would have been as conscious and empathetic toward the family of the first mother. And so it's wonderful that you were. On the other hand, that had to be a damper at times.
Well, it's funny that you use the term first mother because one of the stories that is in the book and that it's been published it got published in Reader's Digest, Women's Day as a separate entity. It's called Who Will This Be to Me? Because a week before we were getting married, I was sorting out some photographs and showing Max, some of my extended family members. And he would look at, well, who would this be to me? And he'd point to my grandfather. And who will this be to me? Who will this be to me? And the last question he asked was, he put his hand on my face and he said, who will this be to me?
Oh, wow.
And I thought, well, here's the moment, right? Here's the moment.
Right.
And I sat and I said, I guess I'll be your second mom.
Beautiful.
Is that okay with you? And then he said, yeah. And he said, well, what am I supposed to call you?
Yes.
Right?
Wow.
What am I supposed to call you? Now, every urge in my body was, call me mommy. Everything was that. But I knew I had this other force in me. So I said, and he'd called me Betsy his whole life because he'd known me.
Right.
So I said, well, honey, you can call me Betsy. You can call me mom. We can make a new name, whatever feels okay for you. And we went like that. And then for about 3 or 4 days, he would say something like, can I go out and play? And he would just mouth the word mom. He wouldn't say it out loud.
Right.
Would say it. What do we have for dinner? Right?
Wow.
Over and over again. And then pretty soon it just slipped back and I was Betsy again.
Sure.
And there was a tiny little heartbreak. I'm going to tell you, it was like,
sure.
And then about a month later in the car, where all magical conversations happen with children, cars.
Right.
We're in the car and he said, I notice I don't call you mom anymore.
Okay.
Now he's, 7 at this point,
Right.
6.5. And I said, yeah, I noticed. And he said, well, I think it's better that way because moms die sometimes.
Oh my goodness.
So here I had this little heartbreak. He was protecting me.
Right. That's beautiful that
Who'd
he
have thought
said it.
that?
Right. Right. Well, how did
I
that
think
play
it's
out
safe.
then?
I think it's safer if I call you Betsy. And he always has. And from that point forward, whenever he calls me that, he's in his late 30s now. When he
Sure.
calls me Betsy, I hear mom.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful that you could have those conversations too. Speaks well to your relationship, but that's so healing because you could have had a lifetime of feeling on the outside.
Or a lifetime of resentment, or a lifetime
Right.
of pressuring a kid to say something that he did that hurt him to say or that felt unsafe to him.
Sure.
I think it's about, I think this is true of step families, blended families, in divorce situations too. I think it's about setting your ego aside and really looking at, these are people that are going through a huge transition of
Sure.
a loss of whatever kind. And when your ego gets tangled up in that, and I'm not saying I didn't have any ego, because I certainly did. And I had moments that I didn't do so well too. But when I set my ego aside and thought about what this is really us living on after a loss. And how can you not empathize with a child who already had the most horrible thing that can happen to a kid, to have their mother die when they're small? That's a terrible thing to happen. So how could I possibly burden him with my, needs for people to hear him call me mommy? I mean, what an absurd expectation that is.
Yes.
Really. So
Yes.
I kind of invented, in my head anyway, I like to think it would go out in the world. I invented a new term because I never liked the word stepmother.
Sure.
Because every fairy tale has an evil stepmother or a wicked stepmother, right? So I think of it as a step-in mother, a mother who steps in.
Yes.
And everybody's done this. You've probably done this even with kids that are not your own. You step in for a moment because you see a kid running around the hardware store and there's no parent, and you stand and you hover for just a minute until you see a daddy or a mommy come, right? So you step, or you step in for a little longer. We've had, friends of my kids that needed a place to stay for whatever reason, that you step in for a little while, or you step in for a lifetime. You foster a child, or you adopt a child, or you marry and you're a stepmother.
Right.
So I think of them as step-in parents and not step.
I love it. I love that. It really helps to adjust expectations, which I feel like is half the battle of the ego issue that can get involved.
Yeah, you're stepping in, but you're not stepping on. You're not
Right.
stepping on the other person, right? You're not squashing somebody else's memory. I also always wanted I kept belongings of Janet's to give Max later. I wanted there to be photographs of her in the house. I didn't want there to be a competition that he had to feel as though he had to choose somehow.
Correct.
Oh, at 5, his actual memories of her are very few.
Right. So it was nice that you could help keep those alive and celebrate those by having her present in your home, in her belongings and things like that, and memories. Yeah. And truly, I think that's the beauty of writing the book also, is you honored her in the book, filling her shoes. What was the process like? Because he was older by then, right? He was in his 20s, or was he in his 30s? Max, you were
no.
When you wrote filling her shoes?
Oh no, I was writing it while it was happening.
Right. Wow. Okay.
But I didn't publish it until he was nearly 20.
Okay. Wonderful. Wow. The years have gone quickly then.
Yeah. No, I mean, he must have been older than that, because it came out in 2013. So
okay. 9 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, late 20s.
He was in his mid 20s. Yeah.
It's still one thing to have a number of essays being written and published sometimes, but far another to it all be compiled into a beautiful book.
Well, okay. Now I'm going to tell you the really schmaltzy sweet story. So Max is now married, and the book came out a little while before he got engaged.
Okay.
And he hadn't read it. it was an advanced reader copy.
Sure.
And he and his then fiance read it to each other. They read chapters to each other. And she told me that it felt like she got to know Max in a new way before they were married.
That is beautiful.
Yeah. I didn't make that happen. That just happened quite magically. I'm pretty fortunate.
Right. But that's just beautiful for other parents who, for whatever reason, are going to be step-in parents. What do you think about the process of writing? Was it therapeutic? Has it always been therapeutic for you as a way to put some perspective and get empathy for the other people involved? Or is it just specifically in your case? What do you think?
Well, I wrote this memoir, but I also write fiction.
Sure.
And the cool thing about being a writer is you do get to try to step into other people's socks, right? And look at the world how they look at it.
Right.
And so somehow writing it both makes you go deeper within yourself, but also lets you stand outside and look at it from different angles. And I think that was really useful for me. It was also just an expression of my own confusion. I got to sort the things out on the page rather than mess them up with my kid.
Right.
Or my husband. I got to kind of work it out first a little bit.
Right.
And in counseling and therapy, those kinds of
Sure.
things too. But it was really, Anais Nin said that she wrote so that she could taste life twice, right? That was her quote. And I've always thought that was lovely and poetic, but it didn't describe my experience. I write so that I can understand life once. I write so I can understand it.
Right.
And that it kind of gets it inside your head. It rattles around, like a pinball, ding, ding, ding. It just,
sure.
But if you get it out of there and put it on the page, somehow it's easier to analyze it. And other people do it through visual arts or music or other things. There are other ways of expressing, but for me, telling the story of it on the page lets me sort it, integrate it, let go of it, all of those things.
I love it. I think that's wonderful. And it makes me, when you said that, it makes me sort of regret that I wasn't writing about real important things as they were occurring with my kids as they were older, because I was always focused on writing a memoir of old events. I should have taken that nudge. And it does help now that I have the time to write things out before responding or reacting. It really can be so beneficial. So I think that's just fantastic. And I also think it's wonderful that it was clearly helpful for his fiance to know that different side.
I never, ever would have predicted that.
That's one of the many beautiful gifts that writing can bring is just that deep connection.
Well, Lizbeth, I hesitate to say this way, but I'm going to. I'm not a person of religion. I'm a person of spiritual faith, but not organized religion. Storytelling is about as close as I come to having a religion, because I feel strongly that in whatever form that humans have this innate need to tell stories, to hear stories, and that's the connective tissue between us.
Yes.
I'm a big lover of other animals, and they chirp and squawk and bark and bellow and all of those things. So they communicate too. And I don't understand all that, but I do know that humans tell stories in a unique way. And I think that whether they're lived stories or imagined stories almost makes no difference. Right. My life has been changed by fiction that I've read that's been inspired me to look at my life a different way. It's why I'm a writer. It's why I'm a coach of writers to help them get their stories out. Right. It's why I host a podcast that helps people tell those stories, because I really believe, honestly, and this is the loftiest thing I'll ever say, I believe if we want to change the world, it's going to be through storytelling. It's going to be because we have empathy for people that we think of as other than ourselves. Right. It's going to be because we get insights into what matters, what pain, what struggle, what joy other people that we don't know experience. And if we don't have stories, we'll never have empathy. Right. And the stories can be told in lots of ways, but my way is writing. But when you've heard a storyteller or and it's stuck in your mind, that you suddenly changed your view of that person or that kind of person.
Right.
I think that's how, isn't that what the UN is about? Is we, we share stories and, this is what it's like in my country. I mean, I
Right.
know there are political things in there too, but I just think
Right.
it's empathy building.
I
We,
like it. Absolutely. All stories. That's what I love about music and movies. It is empathy building. And I feel like when you're writing a story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you can't help but have your own lens. So even if you're writing fiction, there's a bit of nonfiction in there because it's seen through that world, or that character is seen through your eyes. But when you're writing nonfiction, especially as you've written your memoir, or the book of essays about, filling her shoes, you just get to know other people's perspectives better. It gives you that comfortable distance, but it helps you empathize deeper.
well, not only that, sometimes, I mean, I know that when I was an adolescent, the first kind of grown-up book that I read, that was not a kid's book or a story book of, with drawings in it, right, was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And A Tree Grows in Brooklyn is fiction, I think inspired by real life, but it's fiction. And it was the first book I ever read, or story I ever read, where there was an alcoholic dad. And I had a dad with an alcohol problem. And I honestly, at that age, with the age of magical thinking, right, I kind of thought, how did Betty Smith look in my window? How did she see me?
Right.
So, I saw me in her story, and I mean, I didn't literally think she'd done that, but there was this feeling of being seen and understood by somebody who wrote a fictional story about a character I'll never meet. And still, there's something magical that happens when you feel seen.
Right. Absolutely. You feel seen, included, even respected in a way, and brought in. And
And that's why it's so important to have different ethnic groups and all kinds of different people and diverse peoples represented, so that they can see themselves in stories too.
Exactly.
Not every Disney princess needs to look like Ariel, right?
Right. Right. And I am so excited to see that they don't any longer. We're making these little strides here and there. Well, where can people get to find more out about your books? Because there are a number of them, and the Morning Glory podcast. Can you tell us, for listeners to connect with you and readers?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, there's a main website.
Yes.
And my name is and by the way, the ridiculousness of my name, Betsy Graziani Fasbinder, is the reason I have that crazy name is in filling her shoes. That's got to do with my bond with my son. So Betsy Graziani Fasbinder with one S, FASBINDER.com. And then the Morning Glory Project is my podcast where I feature stories of determination like your own. Thank you for being a guest there. People, because I'm perhaps because of what I've gone through in my own family, and I had suicide loss in my family and a number of things, that I'm fascinated with how people endure and move on, because not everybody does. And I don't mean move on, but live with and succeed in their life, have happiness and joy and all the things that life has, when other people fold up and don't make it. Right. So the morninggloryproject.com, you can find the Morning Glory Project wherever you find your podcasts, or by going to the website itself. And it's all about, I told you, it's my religion. Writing them, telling them, helping other people tell them, and formerly as a therapist, helping people tell their intimate stories. So it's all about the sharing of our lived and imagined stories.
I love it. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation. I can't wait to see what you do next, which, by the way, what are you working on?
Oh gosh, that's just a terrible question.
So many things.
Well, the Morning Glory Project is taking a good hunk of time. So we have some beautiful stories coming up in 2023 up here soon. And I've been writing a novel for a while that's been wrestling me back a little bit. So I decided to we're not divorced, but we are on a separation at the moment. I'll come back to it in the new year. But
you and your novel, just to clarify, you and your novel are
not me and my husband. My husband and I, we had our 30th anniversary. We're good.
Congratulations.
But the book and I, we're on a little break.
Okay, I get it. I totally understand.
But back to it after the first of the year.
Well, wonderful. Best wishes in all you do. And thanks so much again for today.
Thanks, Lizbeth.